So there's this South African woman living in Germany who dropped a video online that really shook the table. She basically said South Africans abroad don't like to form communities. And honestly, she's not lying. I've been in Germany for over a decade, and I can confirm, South Africans just don't gather in the same way that other African nationals do. And the reasons for this are both fascinating and a little bit uncomfortable. Let's unpack it. First of all, South Africans generally don't immigrate out of desperation. Now, before you start typing in the comments, hear me out. Yes, South Africa has high unemployment, inequality, crime, and even blackouts. But compared to people fleeing war zones, collapsing economies, or extreme political instability, South Africans aren't usually forced to run for their lives. They often leave because of vibes. Maybe they got a scholarship, maybe they got a job opportunity abroad, or maybe they fell in love with someone in another country. Whatever the reason, they usually arrive in a new country with some stability already lined up. A job, a flat, maybe even friendly colleagues who invite them out and help them settle in. So naturally, they don't feel that urgent need to look for other South Africans to build a survival network. Now compare that to other African nationals in Germany. In places like Hamburg, you'll find big, organized communities of Nigerians, Ghanaians, Senegalese, Zimbabweans, you name it. They're throwing cultural events like Miss Nigeria, Ghana independence celebrations, Afro festivals, and even hosting music events. They own restaurants and Afro shops. You walk into one of these places and immediately see posters inviting people to weddings, baptisms, or community gatherings. That constant activity builds a strong sense of connection. You go there not just for food, but for belonging. South Africans will maybe have a WhatsApp group called South Africans in Germany or South Africans in Europe, and once in a while someone will suggest a braai in the summer. But it's not consistent, and it's nowhere near the same scale, and even when we do meet, it feels more like a casual hangout than an organized cultural community. Well, part of it comes from history. South Africans were socialized under a system of divide and conquer. Distrust is almost baked into the culture. Many of us grew up hearing things like, "Don't eat at other people's houses," or "Don't share your plans until they happen." That mindset makes people cautious about opening up, even to their own countrymen. So when South Africans move abroad, that habit of keeping to yourself comes along for the ride. And here's where it gets interesting. This doesn't mean South Africans don't make friends abroad. They do. But they tend to integrate into their personal circles instead of building large South African networks. For example, I have South African friends here in Hamburg, but they're part of my personal life, not part of a bigger organized South African community. It's more individual, less collective. Meanwhile, my Ghanaian neighbors are inviting the entire city to a party, complete with food, music, and dancing. Nigerians? They've got entire restaurants where you can show up, eat pounded yam, and leave with 5 new friends. But South Africans? We'll just quietly braai in the backyard once a year and call it a day. Now, to be fair, this isn't the same everywhere. I've heard South Africans teaching English in Asia actually do have stronger communities. Maybe the context there is different, maybe the shared challenges pull them together. But in Europe, at least from what I've seen, the trend is pretty clear. South Africans just don't prioritize forming large communities with each other. So here's my question. If you're a South African living abroad, what's your experience? Do you have a real South African community where you are? Not just a couple of friends, but an actual network of South Africans who come together regularly? Or are you like many of us, doing your own thing, connecting more with locals or other nationalities than with South Africans? Because at the end of the day, this conversation is less about criticizing and more about understanding how history, culture, and circumstance shape the way we live abroad. And who knows, maybe just talking about it will inspire more South Africans to start building those communities, whether it's a braai, a festival, or just showing up for each other a little more. So South Africans abroad, are we going to keep being lone wolves, or are we finally going to show up like the Ghanaians and Nigerians do? I'll leave that for you to answer.
South Africans don't know how to be international. I'm a South African living in Germany for over a decade, and she's absolutely right. South Africans do not prioritize forming a community with other South Africans abroad. And I think there's several reasons for it, so I'm going to touch on two or three of them. South Africans generally immigrate for vibes. So, despite the high unemployment rates, the vast inequality, the high crime stats, or the regular blackouts, South Africans are still not desperate enough to seek a better life outside of South Africa. So, the South Africans who are immigrating are generally doing it just for vibes. They're doing it because they want to experience something new, or because they received a scholarship and have an opportunity to pursue their studies in a foreign country. And some people are even immigrating because they fell in love with someone and they want to be with them. Now, all of these factors, they remove the desperation part of living in a new country, because when you arrive, you generally already have some security. You have a job, you have accommodation, and if you have nice enough colleagues, those are going to be your first community. They are going to want to show you around. So you do not feel the need to reach out and seek a South African community. And I think that's what happens with a lot of South Africans. This is very different from the other African nationals. Here in Germany, where I live, for example, in Hamburg, there is a large community of Ghanaians, of Nigerians, of Senegalese, of Zimbabweans, and other African nationals. And very often they host events that are centered around their communities and their culture, like Miss Nigeria or the Ghana Independence Day annual celebration. They will even have like an Afro Fest or an Amapiano music festival. It's not hosted by South Africans. South Africans, on the other hand, we might be a part of South Africans in Germany or South Africans in Europe WhatsApp group. And once in a while, someone might suggest that we meet up for a braai in the summer and we get to know each other. But that's just like a once in a while thing in comparison to, let's say, Ghanaians who own several Afro shops around here in Hamburg where I buy my hair products. And often when I visit an Afro shop, I might see a poster on the wall that is inviting the entire Ghanaian community in that area to a wedding or to a child's baptism. Or there'll be Nigerians who or people from Ivory Coast who own restaurants. Now, this means that as a Senegalese person or a Nigerian person, if you're craving a traditional food, you can go to this restaurant and you meet other Nigerians and you commune with them and you form a network and you get to know them, form relationships with them. This is something that South Africans just don't do. Personally, I do have friends in Hamburg who are South African, but they are not part of the South African community. They are part of my personal community, but that's very different from being a part of the South African community. I think another reason South Africans do not prioritize forming community with other South Africans is because of our history, divide and conquer. A lot of us were socialized not to trust each other. Think about how when you're a kid, you are told not to eat from the neighbor's house, or you're warned against accepting a plate of food that is specifically prepared for you in Mbin, so at a family event. And you're taught also not to share your plans and your goals with other people until they've materialized. And I think all of this socialization, it makes us subconsciously, perhaps even consciously, distrusting of other South Africans, or at least skeptical of them. We just don't feel like we need to create a community with them. Now, I think this conversation might exclude South Africans working and teaching English in Asia. I don't know. I've heard that there is a community there. But if you're a South African living abroad, tell me, what's your experience like? Do you have a community of South Africans? Like, people who are not necessarily your friends personally, but they are part of the community of South Africans where you live? I'm curious. Share with us your experience.